saying you, and we'll try it again. Next time it's going to work. And yeah, so when doing the patch submission, when participating or making this in open source project, when trying to get to know the people, there will always be one specific problem. There's very difficult people, people who are hostile, who are not working very well with you. And every project has them. People who are, like to argue forever and forever and don't have anything important to say. So sometimes the tone might be very rude. People might call you names and call you an idiot or whatever. This is all somewhat accepted in many open source communities. You have to get used to that. Just ignore that. If there is some discussion going on and somebody's behaving like an idiot, you have to recognize that and start ignoring that. So the important thing is, at that point, what I told you earlier, you have to have a bit of an insight into the project structure. If it's the project lead who is like the leader of the project who is behaving like an idiot, then you have some bad luck because you have to deal with it. If it's just some random people using an anonymous email address or whatever, then just don't reply and ignore him. You have to get a bit of a feeling for that. If people are behaving like idiots, just try to figure out, is he doing important work, is he an important contributor, or is he just some random guy who is trolling around on the mailing list. You will always have them, you will always have to deal with them, and it might be difficult at times, but just ignore them, don't go engage in attacks, and this will also be very appreciated because most reasonable developers don't like having constant fights on the mailing list going on. So if somebody tries to pull you into some stupid fight, just tell them to fuck off. It's perfectly acceptable to say that. No, you shouldn't, but just ignore him. Yeah, so at that point you will get more and more used to the way how to work with the open source project, and at some point, if you're doing valuable work, like doing a lot of bug fixing and contributing important patches, people already working on the project will recognize that. They will see, oh, this guy is doing very important work, and so they might trust you, or they will trust you with more responsibilities, like giving you commit access, you can commit your own patches, or they will start listening if you review patches and say, oh, this feature is not very well designed, and they will say, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about, and we trust him. So it's basically about earning trust with the existing developing community. At that point, they will give you commit access, trust you with more responsibilities, and you get more freedom to take that project into the direction you think is right. And yeah, at that step, you are a developer of that project, and yeah, at that point, just do the work and it will happen. And at that point, you can start. I mean, we were talking about 2 things. Working in the open source area as a professional, and at that point you're moving towards that role basically. So yeah, you will be invited to conference. Probably most projects, at least the bigger ones, have some kind of conferences where developers meet. In many cases, if you're doing important work for the projects, you will be invited. The costs will usually be covered for you, so you will get travel costs, hotel costs, living costs for the time being there. So if you get the chance, go there, visit the other developers. This makes it a lot easier to interact with them if you have some face you remember. Otherwise, if you just have some anonymous email address, it's really hard to, what is he really saying or thinking? If you have met the people, it gets a lot easier. And also, for both sides, it will also get easier for them to work with you. And, well, yeah, that's basically how to get into an open source project, get an open source hacker, get familiar with an open source project, move up to more responsibility in an open source project, and at that point, I mean, it's a process, it takes time. At that point, you can consider doing that as a professional. So this is basically the 2 things here. Yeah, so any questions regarding any of all the stuff I just told? Yeah?
I just started working with WordPress platform.
Excuse me.
I just started working with WordPress platform.
WordPress platform?
WordPress.
Ah, yes.
WordPress platform. And I was thinking on doing some documentation. That I mean, I never worked in open source. That I like if it is a good start.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you're doing some documentation, you have to have a close look at all that stuff. Otherwise, you can't write documentation. So you're going to get, I mean, people writing documentation, it's always, projects are mostly happy. I mean, I would ask them by email. We had a lot in the NetFilter project. We had people who were offering documentation in different languages, like in Japanese and Chinese, and we couldn't take that because we couldn't even read it and understand it. But if you're offering to write some English documentation, they probably are going to be very happy about that. And for you, it's a good possibility to learn the source code, document it, and so on. After that, probably somebody is going to, from the main developers, probably going to proofread and read your documentation if it's correct, and he's going to tell you, oh, this is not, so you learn what you misunderstood. And it's also a good way to get to know the project, of course. I think it's a good idea. They will probably be very happy because people writing documentations are rather rare in open source projects. Most people do the hacking and go away again, and so documentation is often missing. So I would think it's a good idea. So, anybody else? Okay. Yeah, sure.
Just one question for curiosity. For your own statement, which was the most challenging project you ever worked?
You mean open source or altogether? Well, basically, I mean, the Linux kernel is the most complex one, and getting to know that was the most complex task. I mean, it's hard to say because there were many sub-projects on the kernel, and there were more complicated ones, there were easy ones. I mean, getting to know the Linux kernel was the most complicated stuff. Basically, with today's complexity, I would think it takes even more than 5 years to get to know all that stuff because it has expanded quite a lot in complexity and it's running on so many different platforms and so many different architectures, so you have to keep a lot of stuff in mind. You can't stop earlier than that, before knowing all that, but to have really understanding of all the subtleties. And well, from a personal coding project, I would say probably HFSC, which is a hierarchical fair service curve packet scheduler. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a packet scheduling algorithm, which is for quality of service. It takes packets which go out some network interface and offers some guarantees. You can say this kind of data traffic should always go out within 5 milliseconds and get this amount of bandwidth and so on, and it offers very nice guarantees which you can define. It's important for voice over IP, for video streaming and so on, for instance, and for lots of that stuff. And this is a very complex algorithm, which was basically from an algorithmic complexity point of view, probably HFSC, I would say. Yeah? Anybody else?
I think that sometimes it's difficult for people that are mostly users of software to make small contributions to some projects, because sometimes you use a program, you find the bug, you take a look at the source code, and you find that it can be easily solved, but you have to go all that path of knowing the tools, how to submit the bugs.
Yes.
It's quite overkilling if you are just a user,
Yeah.
very limited development skills.
Yes, I can see that.
Do you think that open source projects could somehow benefit from making an easy way to make that small contributions?
I mean, there's two different sides to that. For the project itself, it's important to have efficient mechanisms. So if somebody's dealing with lots of contributions, he needs these tools to be able to deal with that, like a revision control system like Git, for instance, which can be challenging, or if you just want to make a small change. But as a main developer or maintainer or something, you really need these tools to save some time to. And also, if you just want to make a small patch and submit it, it's actually, you can go the easy route. Just take the original file, your file, take diff, generate a patch, submit that. You can do that in a couple of minutes. There's some more risk to that than when using the development environment, that your patch will have a broken format or something like that. So it's easier to make mistakes like that, but if you can always take the quick route and just use diff manually, make a quick patch, test that it applies, send it over. It should be possible to do that within 5 minutes. For a project to change its workflow, to make it easier for one-time contributors, I don't think this will happen. I also don't think it's a good idea, because for the project it's important to have efficient and quick tools for people doing lots of changes. So this might hold back some changes, I can see that. And also that is somewhat error prone. But if you just take a manual way using patch and diff, it also works, it's completely acceptable. And this is basically the quickest way to do it.
Okay, what I mean is that maybe if the project have some developers that are willing to collect that one-time contribution,
yes.
maybe the project can...
yeah, there are usually, in the Linux kernel for instance, there are the kernel janitors and the trivial kernel patch monkey or something it's called, which are doing exactly that. It's somebody who is for very small patches, he collects them and sends them to the proper maintainers, and he's doing like all the process stuff, like who's the maintainer and where do I need to send it, doing all that stuff. Linux kernel does it, other projects maybe not, but I mean smaller projects usually don't need this big coordination. I mean, for instance, NetFilter, you just send a patch to the mailing list and the patch is correct and it's small and easy to understand. And in most cases somebody will pick it up and apply it very quickly, probably. It depends, really it's the difference between smaller projects, bigger projects. Smaller projects might be not responsive because of too little manpower. Bigger projects have a lot of processes to follow, but in both cases it usually is possible. You just, for instance, the trivial patch monkey, where you can send the patch, you just have to find him, of course, the address and so on. If you don't know it, it's difficult, but and for big projects it might get just lost in the noise if you send it, but you have to do a little research, probably spend a little time, but usually there is a way to get it in pretty easily if it's uncontroversial, small patch, small contribution. So, any more?
Thank you for all.
Yeah.
¿Lo guardo o eso se va a quedar ahí?